As the years passed, the reign of the barbarian kings, which many of the empire's inhabitants initially considered a temporary nuisance, continued unabated. The protracted crisis of the empire led to a complete collapse of the power of the emperors in the west, and the Eastern Emperor seems to have had no business in matters occurring 1,000 kilometers west of the capital. If Rome itself had already turned into a distant province of the empire in which all affairs were ruled by rude Ostrogoths, what to speak about even more distant Africa, Spain, or Gaul? News from the remote parts of these provinces ceases to reach civilization at all, and the thick fog of ignorance mercifully conceals from us the atrocities committed by the Suevians in the remote mountain valleys of Galicia, or by the pagan settlers from Britain, who escaped from the even more savage Saxons and Angles and settled in Amorica. The large cities in which civilization was still thawing were rapidly declining, and the chronicles of those years enumerate the crimes of the new rulers, who justified their depredations by endless revenge, grudges, or the sudden religious intolerance of the Arian Catholics. In Africa, after the death of the great pirate Gaiseric, power passed to his second son, Guneric. Just like his father, he was not particularly engaged in organizing the state, preferring to take what he liked without any law and restrictions. Vandals under Guneric stopped making annual pirate raids on neighbors, and relations with neighboring countries improved significantly, but all the energy and cruelty they turned on the enslaved population. The solutions of the Vandal authorities were simple and elegant. With a rapidly deteriorating society, destruction of trade and production, the government of some city, facing a shortage of food, simply threw all the unwanted residents outside the walls on pain of death, forbidding them to return. This usually happened during sieges, but here the very life of the country had brought about the collapse. Guneric, according to the rule of succession of the eldest member of the royal family, had to pass power to his nephew, as the eldest in the lineage was the son of his older brother Genzon Guntamund. Guneric had his own son, Hilderic, the son of a Roman princess, and thus a descendant of the Roman emperor. Attempts to transfer authority directly from the father to the son have failed, as Guneric, having tried to reconcile with Nicaea Church, has felt in his gut a deadly danger for authority of barbarians, and has quickly changed policy of reconciliation on the paternal policy of cruel repressions to Catholic bishops. His relatives also suffered. The cruel king exiled his nephews to poor and remote areas of the country, indifferently watched the death of relatives, but still did not stoop to direct murder. Victor of Vitensky, a bishop from Africa, exiled to the island of Sardinia, left us a description of the atrocities of the Vandals over the Christian population of Africa in his book, History of the Destruction of the African Province. As a first-hand participant in the events, he describes how Guneric gathered the bishops in Carthage, only to announce to them that for the duration of the dispute between Catholics and Arians, all their churches would be closed and their property confiscated. The priests were then robbed in front of the decree reader and forbidden, on pain of burning, to help anyone. Naked and beaten, the Catholic bishops of the African cities realized that if they went home, Guneric would declare victory in the Arian religious dispute and remained waiting for the court under the walls of the city. After some time, Guneric brought down upon them his mounted guard, who trampled to death many of the unfortunates, who begged for a speedy trial. Next, the remaining priests were assembled in a place called the Temple of Memoria, and were asked to swear to do what was written in a certain rolled-up charter. An argument began, for the Christians did not know what was written there and realized that it was just another elaborate ruse of the cruel Arians. Finally, it turned out that in the letter the priests had to swear that they would assist in every possible way to the future rule of Guneric's son, Hilderic. And then those who still did not swear or swore with reservations were beaten as opponents of the king. Those who swore were beaten as those who broke the commandments of the Bible. Vandals did what they wanted, and not only to priests. One service from the city of Turbiton, formerly rich and influential, was robbed for his faith. He was beaten with whips, hung on the gate. Then the rope was released and he fell like a stone to the sidewalk. Not only that, but from gate to gate he was dragged on the same rope, and the rough stones of the sidewalk tore the flaps of skin from his back and sides. His suffering for his faith was all the more horrible because he had already experienced similar tortures under Haizeric, having refused to testify against his friend. The population fled the communities, who could by sea, who could in the desert. The Berbers and Moors, who had previously participated in the raids with Haizeric, gradually turned their backs on the Vandals and began to seize unguarded pieces of the frontier, causing the Vandal country to shrink in size year by year. The local Berber kings, who declared themselves rulers in the Roman manner, boasted only of the ghost of former imperial greatness and puffed up their ego in the dark, boundless tyranny of ignorance. Many remote regions of Africa have since remained independent Moorish Roman kingdoms until the invasion of the Arabs. One thing can be added to the honor of the Vandals, that they fairly passed power by seniority, so that Guneric was succeeded by his nephews. Those in their turn, having ruled for almost 30 years, passed the crown by seniority to Guneric's son, so there were no bloody murders for the sake of the crown in Africa. Let's move to Spain. Spain, in those years formerly the kingdom of the minor Amalaric, in fact, was considered by Theodoric as part of the general Gothic kingdom. Even the treasury of the Visigoths was taken to Ravenna, although it was kept there separately. The spread of Theodoric's policy also meant that the laws were restored in Spain. The church was able to hold local councils of priests for the first time in many years, and although the Goths continued to be Arian, persecution against Catholics temporarily ceased. Another sign of the rapprochement between the Roman and Visigoth nobility was the marriage of the governor Theodoric Theudas to a noble Latin woman. This brought the Visigoth such wealth that he, at his own expense, began to maintain an army of 2,000 people, and eventually stopped sending taxes from Spain to Ravenna. Theodoric ordered Theudas to appear in the capital, but he refused, in every way expressing his complete loyalty to the Ostgoths, even began to send some money to Ravenna, and continued to sit in Spain. They could not do anything about it in Italy. All the first years after the defeat of the Franks, the Visigoths continued their slow migration from Gaul to Spain. Perhaps some of them, who remained under the rule of the Franks, still hoped for the return of the old borders, but even after the death of Chlodwig Ostgoths, Theodoric did not resume the war, and the Goths, gradually coming to terms with the loss of the province, mastered Spain. According to calculations of modern scientists, the population of Spain in those years was about 9 million people, so that 200,000 Goths were 3% of the total population. Goths did not change the principles of the development of new territories Germanic. They occupied 1/3 of the land, usually taking possession of existing latifundia, and simply starting to take 1/3 of the profits. The only difference was that there were now no federate treaties, and the Visigoths took the lands according to their own laws. There were no more rebellions, such as the Spanish revolt of Burdunel in Spain during these years, so the colonization process was quite peaceful. Meanwhile, in Gaul, after the death of the great conqueror Chlodwig, his lands were divided among his 4 sons. Knowing the violent temper and cruel manners of the Germanic royal families, neighbors expected the Franks to plunge into a bloody fratricidal war. But it did not happen. Neither Theodoric, the eldest son of Chlodwig from a woman unknown to historians, nor the 3 children of Clotilde did not break the vows of friendship which they gave each other at the division of the paternal inheritance, and moreover, calmly united to aggression on neighbors. Soon the opportunity to attack the Burgundians fell to Clodomir. In Burgundy, King Gundobad was succeeded by his 2 sons, Gaudomar and Sigismund, with Sigismund converted to Catholicism, and Gaudomar remained an Arian. Alas, a zealous Christian Sigismund, without blinking an eye, ordered the strangling of his eldest son, Sigeric, who was in conflict with his stepmother, and this was the occasion for the revenge of the Franks. After Theodoric and Chlodwig gave out their sisters and daughters for neighboring kings, all children in one way or another turned out to be relatives. Sigeric came to the Franks' cousin and grandson Theodoric the Great, and the armies of Clodomir, Theodoric I and the Italian king of the Ostgoths. Theodoric the Great moved to take revenge. Godemar II waited until his brother Sigismund was defeated and captured, and then came out with his army and began to take back the cities, wanting to free all of Burgundy for himself. His plan worked, because first, Clodomir executed Sigismund and his entire family, clearing the throne of Burgundy of pretenders, and then, during the battle with Godemar, when the Franks began to overpower, a group of Burgundians surrounded Clodomir, who had his head cut off and put on a pike, began to wave, showing the Franks. The battle ended, as the Franks lost the purpose of fighting and retreated, leaving Godemar to rule Burgundia alone, and meanwhile a tragedy took place in Orléans, quite in the spirit of those cruel times. To Clodomar's widow, Guntica of Burgundy, came the King brothers. Clothar and Hildebert came with an offer that could not be refused. The children of Clodomir offered to tonsure into monks, and the kingdom abolished and divided among the uncles. Proud Guntheka, quite rightly for queens of that time, but not at all Christianly, said that the long hair of the Merovingians for her children is dearer than life, and the uncles, right in front of their mother, killed 10-year-old Theodebald, and afterwards, due to the fact that Hildebert was a little kinder than Hlothar and hesitated, Hlothar helped him to kill, and 8-year-old Guntar. 5-year-old Hlodewald was saved only by the fact that kind people managed to cut the boy's hair and sent him to a monastery. St. Claude would live out his life as the patron saint of the monastery he founded near Paris. Clothar, in order to calm the public, took Guntica as a wife. The brothers divided the kingdom of Clodomira. What about Theodoric? He, having learned about what happened, demanded his part of the kingdom and was satisfied that he received his share of the division of the lands of the dead. About the same years, Theodoric repelled the first attack of the Danes. This sea people lived even farther away than the sea pirate Saxons, but also began to slowly master the craft of sea robbery campaigns. True, this time unsuccessfully. At first, Theodoric attacked the leader of the campaign, Hygelac, and destroyed his small detachment, and then, when divided to rob the Danes, began to retreat. They met the Frisians, who completed the defeat in the sea battle. But all this was a small routine. There were no big wars because of the system of alliances, which created the king of the Ostgoths, Theodoric. Next time we will consider the state of the countries to the east of Italy, so that then we can understand the events and wars that broke out after the death of the great conqueror of Rome.